In recent years, China has been increasingly involved in multilateral diplomacy. That's diplomatic speak for working with multiple countries on issues. Such high-profile events as the APEC and G20 summits and new initiatives like the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and One Belt, One Road are prime examples of China working towards a more connected, secure and developed world. Later, we'll talk with our panel about China's growing role, but we begin in Beijing with CCTV's Wang Tongxuan. And Tongxuan, we've seen China transforming from a limited participant in multilateral diplomacy to a more proactive supporter and contributor. Give us a few examples of where China has played a key role in strengthening international cooperation.
Well, Anand, China is now the largest contributor of UN peacekeepers among the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Something which gained widespread global attention was the tragic deaths of Chinese peacekeepers in both South Sudan and Mali this year. And on top of the putting boots on the ground, China also found 10% of overall UN peacekeeping operations, making it the world's second highest contributor. And China ratified the Paris Agreement, setting climate change reduction goals beyond 2020, with Beijing committing to cut carbon emissions here by up to 65% by 2030 from 2005 levels. And last month, China hosted the G20 summit with, for the first time in G20 history, leaders gathered to discuss sustainable development goals in an effort to tackle climate change. And on top of all this, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the only multilateral financial institution formed in the 21st century, was initiated by China. So the country has quite a list of recent international accomplishments under its belt, Anand.
Right, let's look at security. China is playing a constructive role in addressing concerns over the DPRK's nuclear program. That's the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In 2014, President Xi proposed a new approach to Asian security. Tell us more about that.
Well, President Xi's new approach was unveiled in Shanghai. His vision is that regional security and economic development go hand in hand, and China aims to play a more proactive role in both of those areas. He said China would work on new regional security mechanisms, such as an Asian Security Partnership Program and a Code of Conduct for regional security. So the overall theme is that Asian countries should handle their own affairs and solve their own regional problems. Xi also called on regional leaders to extend efforts in the economic sphere. For instance, in the past few years, China has invested a lot in building an economic belt along the old Silk Road, which runs through Central Asia. On the eastern side of this plan, China also initiated projects with its partners under the framework of the Maritime Silk Road. So in short, development and security reinforce each other. This is a key message from him, Anand.
Thanks, Tongxuan. That's CCTV's Wang Tongxuan reporting from Beijing. Okay, let's get to our panel. Joining us from Islamabad is Ali Sawa Naqvi. Among his many high-level positions during a distinguished 36-year diplomatic career, he served as Pakistan's ambassador to the International Atomic Energy Agency. He is currently the founding executive director of the Center for International Strategic Studies. Pepe Escobar is the former roving correspondent for Asia Times Online, now an independent geopolitical analyst. He joins us from Paris. And with us from London is Kei Jin. She's a professor at the London School of Economics. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Kei Jin, let me start with you. China is taking a bigger and bigger role in international affairs. It's just hosted the G20 summit. What was the message that China wanted to send through that summit, and did it succeed?
I think the main message that China wanted to send is that China will be a global player. And it is evident in the way that it has focused a lot of the discussions on economic cooperation. I do believe that in today's world, and given the economic situation that we are facing, and the responses, which is a growing protectionism, and we are really in need of greater international cooperation, both on the monetary policy side, but also trying to lower protectionism in order to stimulate the economy. Also, even equally important is fiscal coordination. And we're seeing definitely that China is taking a lead on this. So, and of course, the talks in the political and diplomatic side as well, China trying to take a greater global, regional leadership. So I think that was the main message. I think it was accomplished, and it was very focused discussion. And so I think it was able to achieve what it intended to do.
Ambassador Naqvi, China is also playing a growing role in initiatives at the United Nations, from sustainable growth to peacekeeping operations to climate change. Would you say that China is in a very unique position right now to bridge the divide between North and South, developed and developing?
That's right. China says that it is still a developing country. China aligns itself with developing countries and expresses solidarity with them. So I think being in that position and being now a fairly developed economy, which is doing quite well, China is certainly in that position of playing as a bridge, of acting as a bridge between the North and the South. And China has a policy of constructive engagement with most of the developing world countries, many in Africa, many in Asia. And Pakistan always has had a very good relationship with China over all these years. And with Pakistan, they have started this China-Pakistan economic corridor under the One Belt, One Road proposal or scheme. And that is a very ambitious and a massive project. So China is a bridge between the North and the South.
Yeah, I want to get to that project in a moment, but let's go and look at South-to-South cooperation. Pepe, in 2015, China pledged $2 billion to support South-to-South cooperation. And in fact, the Chinese President Xi Jinping also announced an increase in investment in the least developed countries to $12 billion by 2030. How significant is that, given that some of the richest countries in the world, like the United States, like Japan, are actually decreasing aid?
Exactly. It is significant, and it's not a lot when you think about this figure until 2030. The position of China is absolutely special, because it's a sort of a very complex link between the G20 and the G77, between the richest countries and the wealthiest countries in the world, which are more or less stagnated, apart from China, of course, and the global south, including least developed countries. So it's a multipolar, multi-vector strategy, in fact. China has the will, has the funds, of course, and they have to apply a lot of soft diplomacy as well, to not only to help least developed countries, but always in a win-win situation, of course. Sometimes there is a little bit of resentment on the way China would be or could be encroaching into certain countries in Africa or even in South America. But this is something that Chinese diplomacy, they can smooth the edges in the long run. In terms of cooperation itself and projects, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is absolutely key. And the BRICS New Development Bank is also absolutely key. So China will be covering projects within the BRICS, then expanded to other developing countries. And in terms of Asia, as part of the new Silk Roads, One Belt, One Road, it's the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Not to mention the new Silk Road Fund set up by China, which will also benefit countries, let's say, in Central Asia. So it's an extremely complex strategy, and it goes all over the spectrum, which is something that we should expect from China now that China is, okay, let's say the second largest player in the world, and soon is going to be the first.
Eugene, when we look at the One Belt, One Road initiative, of course, this is a very ambitious plan which has been launched by China. The Economist says China is positioning itself as a key source of trade for countries in 7 key regional spheres around the world. It's also known as OBOR, One Belt, One Road. How is it impacting those countries that it's already reached?
Yes, before answering that question, I just wanted to complement one thing that was just said previously about South-South. I think it is an important point from an economics perspective. If you look at trade, what is a well-known fact is that North-North trade and South-South trade are much more important than north-south trade. So in effect, developing countries tend to trade with each other. And I really see this, the developing bloc as a potential economic future. And apart from the political reasons, whatever they might be, or the diplomatic ones, I think from an economic perspective, I think China is definitely taking the right strategy to building that regional economic network, because that is where a lot of the growth potential and also the complementary kind of trade dynamics will occur. And coming back to your question about the AIIB and the general One Belt, One Road initiative, I think that, if you look around the world, China is the one that is probably one of the few that is taking real international strides to achieve some kind of cooperative effort. As I mentioned, in today's world where the interest rate is at the zero lower bound, monetary policy is losing its effectiveness, this is where fiscal policy could be very effective, especially when interest rates are low. And you do need some kind of international fiscal coordination. So I see this not only as thinking about the long term, about building infrastructure and connecting these economies, and therefore increasing trade and reducing the cost of capital, of production, but also in the near term, where there are countries that have some fiscal capacity, they should be using it, and China is definitely taking the lead on this.
Ambassador Naqvi, let's look at Pakistan as an example. There's been massive investment in the China-Pakistan corridor, the economic corridor that you just talked about. What has that done for Pakistan's economic growth?
I think this will be a big stimulus to Pakistan's economy in many ways. It will create infrastructure. It will enable us to have power generation on a very big scale, and it will also enable us to link up to China with Kashgar and then beyond into Tajikistan and Central Asia. So actually what might well happen is that the unstable situation in Afghanistan, I hope it becomes more stable, but if it continues to be unstable, then the access to Central Asia from Pakistan, from the seaport of Karachi on through China into Tajikistan and beyond would be accessing Central Asia apart from the Afghanistan route. So many things are in the works, and many ideas have been floated, and work has already started. By 2018, the first phase of the China-Pakistan economic corridor would be virtually completed, and then we will move on to the next phase for the power generation industries. So I think China and Pakistan will be have embarked and will be going on to a very profitable economic development of the region, let alone Pakistan.
Pepe, we look at this One Belt, One Road initiative. It's arguably one of the biggest, most ambitious trade and investment initiatives the world has seen recently. I mean, it will connect very disparate parts of the world. China has signed memoranda of understanding with something like 56 countries, yet we don't see too much enthusiasm for this kind of initiative from the world's biggest economic power, the United States.
Look, there's only one integration project in the world at the moment, and it's an extremely ambitious pan-Eurasian, trans-Eurasian integration project. There's nothing that even compares to One Belt, One Road. I shuttle between Europe and Asia. Of course, this is discussed in Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Iran, in Central Asia, across Russia, etc. In Europe, vaguely, we see some rumblings in the German media once in a while, but for instance, in Britain, in France, in Italy, and Spain, it's practically ignored. The ramifications are huge for Europe as well. In the United States is completely isolated from One Belt, One Road, and obviously they tend to dismiss it as a scheme. It's whenever we see any article that plans to be in depth about One Belt, One Road, it barely touches the surface in terms of the complexity, the range, and how in geopolitical terms it's turning the tables already upside down. There was a meeting in Xi'an last month, in fact, where after 3 years, One Belt, One Road was launched over 3 years ago by President Xi Jinping, first in Kazakhstan and then in Indonesia. Very significantly. The project was launched in Central Asia and in Southeast Asia, practically simultaneously. And at this meeting in Xi'an, they were discussing progress so far, which for 3 years is not bad at all, but especially what's going to happen in the next 7 or 8. So we're going to have One Belt, One Road in practical terms in front of us by 2023, 2024. That is after the end of President Xi Jinping's 2 terms, in fact. This is beyond huge, in fact. And we can see details in terms of embryonic high-speed rail networks from eastern China and central China all the way to Europe, crossing Iran, and then linking Iran with Turkey. The duplication of the Trans-Siberian, which is going to be a high-speed rail Trans-Siberian as well. Chinese-Pakistan economic corridor, ports in Myanmar, ports in Bangladesh. So it's wide-ranging. And the only ones who actually cover it in detail are Chinese media, in fact, and to a much lesser extent, Russian media. Western media ignores it because they still don't understand what Obor means. They downplay the geopolitical resonance of Obor. They always come back to the same discourse of Chinese aggression in the South China Sea, which is the usual press release issued by Washington. So you see the difference between in East and West, especially the way Obor is being covered.
I personally think that the United States is, I agree with my fellow panelists that the United States is not likely to react very positively to this, because you see the Chinese constructive engagement in the field of economic development in the region is something that might well challenge U.S. Domination, economic domination in this whole area and Asia and all that.